In the previous video, we talked about setting up a very basic Spring Boot application, which you can see here on the screen. It has a very simple starter, which just has a main function and runs the Spring Boot application. And we also now need to set up our run for configuration for our app. So in IntelliJ, what you can do is go on to this little piece of information, go to edit configurations. Now you need to select an application called as Quartz runner and then run it. If not, you can also use the Spring Boot's way of running the application, but I would say the application way helps you to understand how Quartz or how a Spring Boot application works behind the scenes. So all you have to do is, let's do it again. So we do a plus application. We can give it a name as Quartz email runner, running it on local machine. The main class is something which we need to talk about. So it's going to be Quartz scheduler application, and that's it. So that's all you need to have your runner ready, and you can always just run it whenever you want to. So that it gets easier to have a runner ready. You don't have to always click this. You can always click it here or the debug mode and then have your application running. So coming to this video, we'll be talking about the configurations or the properties that our application needs to set up Quartz, to set up the database, and also to set up our mailing properties. So we'll be using an email ID to actually send the emails, right? Or to schedule the emails. So we need to also set up some properties there. So let's get started. So go to resources and to application.properties. This is where basically we have all of our applications ready and the properties. So now what we're going to do is have them write the application properties for our application. So first comes the Spring data source. So the Spring data source is basically the database which will be connecting to your Spring Boot application, and some information regarding that, which includes the URL, the username, and the password. So let me write the ones for mine. I will not be giving it the values for now. I'll be doing it in the next video, because the next video is going to be dealing about configuring our database and how we can set up our MySQL server and integrate it with IntelliJ. So Spring data source URL, Spring data user name, and we can do Spring username password. Now it is generally recommended that you do not have your password in plain text when it comes to enterprise applications or projects that you're deploying on, let's say, GitHub or anywhere else. So just for now, for practice purposes, we'll have our password in plain text. But if you're using this to create an enterprise application, or using it to create or deploy it on a provider or on GitHub, then make sure that your password is not there in plain text, and it's modified or hashed in some way or the other. So this is these are the properties that we need for our Spring data source, which is going to be a MySQL server, which we talk about in the next video. The second thing which we need is the Quartz properties. So let's start writing them. So the first is going to be Spring.Quartz.jobStoreType. Now, as you can see, these have two options. One is JDBC, which we are going to use, where it stores your jobs in the database. The upside or the advantage of this is that whenever you shut down your application, then restart it again, it takes up all the failed jobs, or it restores the jobs from the database and then runs it again, so that you always have that job running, and it's never in the failed scenario unless something happens from the user point of view. Next is storing it in memory. So this is basically a way of Quartz to store your jobs in memory only, not inside a external database. So whenever you shut down an application and then run it again, the jobs get destroyed, and then new jobs have to be created whenever you restart your application. So since we need our jobs to be persistent and to be inside a database, we'll be using JDBC method or the value. The next is the thread pool count. So the spring dot quartz dot properties arg dot quartz dot thread pool dot thread count. Maybe 5. So this is basically the amount of threads that you want your application to use when it's scheduling its jobs. So for example, if you have 2 or 3 jobs which are scheduled for the same time, you can have 5 threads in which each of the thread will have its own job running at the same time, so that it's less load for the application and for that particular thread. So next comes our mail properties. So since we'll be scheduling our mail, using scheduling our mails, we'll have to have an email from which we send it from, and we also have to tell it what the protocol is, what kinds of things are we using. So let's add them. So the first property is the host, and since I'll be using Gmail to showcase the demo, I'm using Gmail Simple Mail Transfer Protocol, or smtp.gmail.com. So the next two properties are the port and the username. So port is basically the port in which you would want to send the mail through. So for here I have 587, and the username is my email ID. And you can also email me on this email ID if you have any doubts regarding your resume, if you want to talk about your cover letter, how to get jobs, how to get a software engineering job later on. So this is the email which I use. And next is going to be the password. So I will not be writing that here, but again, you should not have your password in plain text, but you should have them hashed. So spring dot okay, so these are the basic properties that you need to make sure that your application has enough it needs to build up the email scheduling app. The next thing which comes in is two I would say necessary properties, one being the authentication and the other being start TLS. So we'll have that for now, and I'll talk about them later in the upcoming videos. So let's just input those properties now. So with these properties, now we have our application ready to start building it and then schedule jobs and schedule emails. But before we do this, we need to have an additional step which we need to make sure that we are doing, so that we have our emails which are actually being sent to the receiver. So since we are using Gmail by default does not allow you to send emails through a less secure application, and since we have literally no security in our application, it will be hard for us to actually let Google send our emails, and we'll just prohibit it or mark it as spam or just not send them. So what we need to do is go to this URL. So the URL will also be in the description below, and scroll down. So this is the security part of Google's account. Scroll down to less secure apps, and you should make sure that you turn it on. So you can click here when it says turn on, and then click it to turn on. and make sure that you do this only after reading what's happening here. I do not recommend this. It's just something which I have done. So make sure that this is turned on if you want to use the smtp.gmail.com for your particular email scheduling app. So this is all for this video. In the next video, we'll talk about how we can set up the database for Quartz on IntelliJ. So we'll have our database ready here, as you can see, a Quartz demo. How to do this? How do we actually have our Quartz table? So we'll have these kind of tables, and we'll talk about what all of them mean. We'll also talk about what Quartz is, the terminologies behind Quartz, and how powerful Quartz is when you have to actually schedule an email, and how easy it becomes when you want to do it. So thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.